Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So, usually I'm in my home and I have the utmost pleasure of being here with Phoebe, Esmon, and Christian Gaal to talk about vintage glassware today. And I'm on location. I am here in Tampa, Florida, uh, undisclosed location, so you can't stalk me. Again, I'm Monique Brackett. I'm the Jamaican Rum Portfolio Ambassador for Appleton Estate, part of the Campari America Group. And thank you for joining us today. Our hashtags are at Appleton Estate USA. My hashtag is at rum_mo_rum. And of course, this is also on behalf of Campari Community and Campari Academy USA. If you are not part of our community yet, please go on our Instagram page and definitely check out some of the things that we have. We have a great mailing list. And if you're part of it, you get some cool stuff throughout the year. So I've taken enough time in terms of the housekeeping stuff. And again, what are we doing here today as far as Portland Cocktail Week? We're always doing fun and funky stuff. And I love the fact that Portland Cocktail Week looks at out of the box type of topics. So it's really cool that today we're here and we're talking. And the topic is vintage is the new green. It's the what and why of vintage bar and tableware. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we want to say hello to our presenters, which is Phoebe Esmon and Christian Gaal. Hi, Phoebe.
Hi everybody.
What's up?
Christian's in the back there. Hey, Christian.
How's it going up there?
It's going. So we are definitely tuned in. And for folks who've joined us, please feel free to put things in the chat, ask lots of questions, because we want to keep this conversational. It's the type of topic that it's a great mind share topic, because Christian and Phoebe come with a wealth of industry knowledge, as well as they're very knowledgeable in terms of vintage glassware. And so they're going to share with us, and it's really great to have some things that maybe like popped in your head that you want to ask. So without any further ado, I am going to kick it over to Phoebe and Christian. And as soon as we get questions, and if I have some questions too, we're just going to pop it out there. Is that cool, Phoebes?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Perfect.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our home. Just a little preamble as Christian finishes making notes on the whiteboard for you guys. We kind of came to this. I grew up in an antique business. My parents ran an antique business for most of my life, and I worked in it until I left home to go to college. So I kind of have always had an affinity for old things. And when Christian and I got together, we were both working as bartenders. And we, you can't always physically bartend forever. You segue into other parts of your career, whether that's bar management or designing programs, both of which are things we do. But we also started collecting glassware and antiques related to the bar, and decided that we'd like to, one of the things we like is using vintage glassware and tableware in our bars. In the bars that, in some of the bars that we've opened, have utilized that, and I love the way it looks. I love choosing a special glass for a special drink as I make it, and customers respond well to it. I have found in the past, knowing that you're thinking about them when you're making their drink. Like I had a regular who just wouldn't drink out of a coupe. He didn't care what the drink was. He wouldn't drink out of a martini glass. It had to go in a tumbler or a old fashioned or something. So, but I always tried to find one that he'd like to carry. You know what I mean? Because it gives you another way to sort of tailor the way that you sort of think about the service for your customers. So now, Christian, now that Christian's facing forward,
Well, almost.
he's gonna start by talking to you about sort of some of the science of glassware and the anatomy of a glass, and we're gonna take it away from there. So I'm handing it off to Christian for a minute.
Okay, well, I mean, in order to talk about glassware, it's useful to understand what's going on in and around glass. Glass is made from silica primarily. We generally know that to be, we know it by a common name, sand, but not all sands are created equal. In order to get the kind of performance that you're looking for from an aggregate, which is what the industry term is, an industrial aggregate, for the purposes of glass production or for the purposes of making concrete. You need to use, it's preferable to use sand that's been formed through the action of water, because rather than the action of wind, like you get in desert sand, for example. You really have to be going for beach sand specifically. So that's what I mean when I say silica. There are a number of types of glass that are produced. The first type of glass that was ever used by human beings is a naturally occurring glass that is caused by the effect of basically volcanoes and asteroids. And that's, of course, I'm having a mental block. Obsidian. Obsidian is a form of naturally occurring glass that occurs when you have basically sand-like silica-rich deposits that are exposed to extreme heat and or pressure.
Isn't that what we called igneous rock in high school?
Well, obsidian is a form of igneous rock, but if you were talking about it in terms of its crystalline structure, it is a glass, rather than a mineral with an existing crystalline structure. This is something that has basically had its crystalline structure destroyed by the process of the heating, and it kind of becomes a liquid. It becomes a very slow liquid. All glass is essentially an extremely slow liquid. It's obviously, in dealing with it, you can deal with it like a solid. It's not, but it is technically, in terms of the way that the molecules in the substance interact with one another, they kind of slide past each other very slowly, like you'd expect from a liquid. Now, in terms of the types of glass that are produced, in terms of glassware, one of the first types of glassware that was available for use that has any sort of resemblance to what we think of as a glass was you would basically take quartz. You take quartz crystal, and you take a big hunk of that, and you would shape it through a subtractive process until you were left with what you wanted to be your glass.
Right.
And that was utilized by humans before we figured out how to produce our own glass. Once we started into that, there is glass production in ancient Egypt, in ancient Rome, numerous cultures. I'm not going to go into that history because we don't really have time to address it. But the point is that the first glass that was produced had a lot of impurities in it, partly because of the deposits that they were using for their alkali. So you have to have an alkali, also known as a flux. An alkali is basically a base, something that is the opposite of an acid. So it's high on the pH scale, and you're using these basic salts in order to reduce the melting point of the silica, and thereby encourage the process of melting it and bringing it to a temperature where it is liquid enough that you can form it, manipulate it, and then wait for it to solidify again. So depending on what kind of alkali you use, you get different effects. And what they were using, what the Romans, for example, were using was a deposit that was located a little bit northwest of Cairo in Egypt. And it was referred to as Natron by the people who were producing the glass at that time, because it was located in a geographical area called Wadi al Natru, or Wadi al Natrum, I think it was. So it was this little wadi, or dry riverbed, where they would grab this stuff to use it in order to get the silica to melt more readily. But if you use, depending on the purity of what you're using, you're going to get different results. The Romans, for example, got glass that had some color to it. It was sort of either grayish or brownish. And depending on the level of purity of the silica that you're using, you're going to get some impurities out of that that are oftentimes it's referred to as stone. Like, so if there's any sort of little bit of impurity in the final glass, that's just referred to generically as a stone. And then
You gotta move faster.
okay, we have to go faster. So there are various. Oh, and before we go forward, the one last historical note I'm going to make is that the word crystal, which is going to figure significantly in our discussion today, comes from the Italian cristallo, because that was what the Venetian glass blowers on the island of Murano referred to as a type of crystal that they had developed to have the clarity of rock crystal, of the quartz that we were discussing earlier, where you would use the subtractive process. So that was a clear crystal that didn't have any color, and they were trying to go for that, and eventually developed it, and it was called cristallo. And so that's why we use the word crystal to refer to all this stuff. 90% of the classes.
Christian, I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Is that why you find in the world of like aperitivo and amaro, the glassware is so particular? Is there, dumb question, right? Because when I look at the world of Italian bitters, there's always this aspect of the right glassware and a look, that kind of Italian-esque look. Is this the sort of origin of that?
Well, I would say that you're onto something, but I think it's a little bit more generalized than you might think. I think it's because Italy has such a long history of glass production that there is a great celebration of glass in that culture, and that's one of the things that is looked to as a form of status. Depending on what sort of glassware that you can afford to offer your guest or to enjoy yourself. And I think that part of, just the same way that for example, Japan, ice is such a huge part of the conversation of how you enjoy spirits. In Italy, glassware, figures very prominently. So yes, I would say that historically there's a social context for that significant attention to that. And also when it comes to the technical appreciation of the different liquori, since they do have significantly strong herbaceous qualities, sometimes the nature of the glass, whether it flares out at the rim, for example, in order to dispel some of those more intense aromas, sometimes allow you to enjoy the overall effect of a spirit or a liqueur, just the same way that if you're drinking something straight, like an 80 proof or 100 proof spirit, you wouldn't want to constrict the aperture of the glass too much, because you're just going to get too fumy. So when it comes to aperitivi and digestivi, especially digestivi, yeah, it is useful to have specific types of glassware as well. But yeah, there's a lot of attention paid to glassware in Italy because Italy takes pride in their glassware. And that history that we're referring to, though that we can't really discuss in much detail at the moment. But thanks for the question.
As a side note, our website is under construction, but once it's up and operational, there'll be a blog where we'll be going into greater depth in terms of history, and sort of the development of these objects that we have. So very, very briefly, we're going to try to go through the different kinds of glassware that are produced now. We're just going to jump straight to the present because that's all we have time to do.
90% of the stuff that's made today that is called a glass in general is what's referred to as soda lime glass. Soda lime glass, the primary percentage in the batch, in the mix, is the silica itself, the sand. So that's 60 to 75%, right, of what you might call, if we were talking about a spirit, we might call it the mash bill, right? And then the remaining amounts are, there's 12 to 18% that is taken up by soda, which, as we talked about, is the alkali, is the base, the flux that is used to lower the melting point of the glass. And then you've got 5 to 12% lime. So the soda in this discussion is calcium oxide in this particular case. And I'm sorry, sodium carbonate, and the calcium oxide is the lime. Lime is basically derived from limestone, and it's just like a concentrated base that is used for various chemical purposes, including the production of soap. That'll probably be the most significant use of lime in the early history of man and woman and whoever else. People who get smelly, which is everybody. So anyway, so soda lime glass, 90% of what's being made, soda lime glass. It is the cheapest form of glass to produce. It is the form of glass that requires the lowest temperature of all the different kinds of glass that are produced. And it is pretty tender when it comes to things like chemical corrosion, heat shock, where you have, or temperature shock, where you have like quick changes in temperature that can cause cracking. And just heat in general, the amount of heat that it can withstand and still be within an operational envelope. So that is soda lime glass. Next up, we have potash glass. Potash is another substance that was used, extensively in early manufacture and by people like hermeneutists, and I'm having a mental block because of sleep. The guys, the people who, the magnum opus, early scientists, pre-scientists, pre-scientific, like Paracelsus. Mental block.
Yeah, you're passing it on.
Sorry. Alchemists. Who also worked with potash, and potash is basically potassium. It's a potassium-based salt, alkali. So if you use potash instead of the sodium carbonate as your alkali, you get a different set of performance characteristics that are slightly higher than those of soda lime glass. So what you end up with is what now is referred to as lead-free crystal. So you can use various alkali salts for it, potassium-based, zinc-based, and then there's another one I'm trying to think of: potassium, zinc, and well, I know that you can use boron. You can use boron, aluminum. We're going to talk about that in a second. But basically, potassium and zinc, and those are the ones that you see, like for example, Bormioli Rocco, like some of those Italian companies that make lead-free crystal. That's what they're talking about. It's basically a slightly higher grade of soda lime glass style production, but with a different alkali. And what you get is it cools faster, but it also cools harder. So you get something that's a little bit more dense, and it has a little bit more brilliance to it. When we talk about brilliance, we're talking about the refractive index of the glass. So therefore, like how much light it kind of gathers and sort of re-emits. So that's what's used for, and it also has slightly better anti-corrosion, like it's more resistant to corrosion, and it is like a slightly better in its heat properties.
Okay, lead.
Then lead glass. So this is one of the more important things that we're going to talk about today.
I am holding up a lead glass.
So lead crystal, which is the stuff that was first developed by the Venetians and called cristallo because it looked more like rock crystal. That's made with 20 or more % of lead in the batch. A lot of them tend to be around 24%, and then there are other ones that are all the way up to 30% and above. And those usually, lead glass is heavier for its size because of the presence of lead. I mean, if you literally have, a fifth, anywhere from a fifth to a quarter or so of the weight of the substance of the glass being lead, which is a very dense, heavy element, it's going to add mass, for its size. So lead crystal tends to feel heavier than it looks. That's one way to tell.
Another way to tell is the way that it sings. So if you do that, it sings. And actually, as Christian was tapping the counter, you probably couldn't hear it, but I could hear this glass singing as Christian was just vibrating it on the counter with his hands. If you use a regular glass, this is probably a Potish line glass that I'm going to throw on the floor. It doesn't have the same resonance. I mean, there's a significant difference. This is just sort of if you're shopping for yourself or whatever, and you want to know if a glass is lead. This one way is by the way it sounds. If you're not going to carry around a spectrometer with you.
Yeah, there are other ways.
Someone just mentioned that it's sort of like it reminds them of the Waterford glass. Is that a good comparison?
Waterford crystal is definitely, in fact, it's probably I would call it one of the premier examples of lead glass crystal. Yes. Now, lead glass, how it varies from soda lime glass and potash lime glass is that it's softer but denser than the other glass. And so what that allows it to do is it gives it a little bit more strength for its size. Now, does that mean that crystal is more robust than soda lime glass? Well, that depends on what you do with it. When it comes to crystal, one of the purposes of crystal to take advantage of its greater strength, they make it thinner. They blow it thinner. So that you end up with a finer rim, because the fineness of the rim is thought to enhance your enjoyment, say, of wine.
So does the finer rim also affect the way the glass sings?
To an extent, but what it really affects more so than that is how you store and clean and care for the glass. So, for example, the reason you don't put lead crystal in the dishwasher, for example, is the fact that in a dishwasher things have to go in upside down. And the rim is the most delicate part of it, and the rim on a lead crystal glass is oftentimes produced to a much finer tolerance because it's possible to do so. But it doesn't necessarily make it stronger, but it does make it stronger for its super thin, structure.
Which, as an aside, I'm gonna interrupt because we're talking about using vintage glassware in bars and things like that. And I've had people who ordered glasses from us in the past ask about using lead glass. There's a lot of argument. There's a lot of discussion about whether it's safe to drink spirits out of lead glass, and how would you store it in a bar if you don't have overhead storage. You don't want to store your glasses upright. The health department's going to kill you. If you have overhead storage, which is illegal in some places, you could hang them. But the higher proof the spirit that goes into the glass, the more likely it is that something will be leached out of the glass.
Let's go back. Let's rewind. Let's rewind. So lead glass. Before we go on to what you're talking about, we're going to also mention very briefly that the other purpose of doing lead glass is that the softness of it allows it to be cut more readily, and so that's what. So cut crystal allows you to sort of demonstrate the brilliance of the glass much more because you've got the facets that are picking up and diffusing the light, right? So one of the other ways that you can tell that you're dealing with a lead crystal glass in the first place, in addition to that ring test or tapping it with a fork or a spoon and seeing how long it takes for the sound to dissipate and how pure the sound is to take a look at it and hold it up to a light source and see if it refracts light because it does. Lead glass has more of a capacity for prismatic effect of cracking apart light into its different constituent colors than like lower grades of glass. So you can look for a little bit of prism effect. You can listen for the sound. You can also take a look at the actual cuts of the crystal, because if you cut soda lime glass, it stays sharp at the edges. But if you cut the lead glass, because it's softer, the edges tend to kind of get rounded off a little bit. So like it's not going to be quite as sharp an angle.
So Christian, just so that everyone can make sure that everyone heard that. So you said the last one is you look at the cuts.
You can look at if it's a cut piece, if it's a piece of cut crystal, you can sometimes get a clue as to whether it's lead glass based on how sharp, like if you run your fingers along the cuts on the side of the glass, if they feel softer, then you're more likely to be dealing with lead glass. If they feel sort of sharper, then you're probably dealing with a soda lime glass or a potash lime glass, which would be like the lead-free crystal, for example.
And we're at 2:30. So
okay, all right. We have to get going. So another type of glass. It uses a different kind of flux. It uses a boron-based salt, so it's borosilicate glass. Now, borosilicate glass, what's interesting about it is that it's basically what you would think of as tempered glass. So first of all, the presence of the boron helps it out in a way that I don't know about, because I'm not a chemist and I'm not a glass blower. But we do know that in combination with the chemical properties that vary with the nature of the flux, combined with the higher temperature that's used to fire it, and then also there's a process called annealing. I should have put this on the board.
Don't take the time.
And I do need to anneal to even write anneal on here.
We can also pop it in the comments too, so that everybody gets the proper spelling.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to put it up, just so that people could see what we were talking about in terms of spelling. So when you anneal something, what you do is you reduce the rate at which it cools. So, for example, if you were dealing with a kiln where you're dealing with glass in a kiln, what you would do once it was formed in the way that you wanted it to be, you would set it off at the very sort of edge away from the fire. If you're talking about like a traditional kiln that has an actual fire in it, like a wood fire, you would put it away from the wood fire or in like a little corner where it would have a little bit of heat. It would be exposed to a little bit of heat, not as much as earlier in the process, and then it would cool very gradually, and you'd get like a more a stronger structure, like a stronger like the bonds between the molecules would be strong. So that is what you talk about for tempered glass. It's also with borosilicate glass specifically, which is a type of tempered glass. You are looking at all the bakeware, like glass bakeware.
Pyrex, that kind of stuff.
Pyrex is the classic example.
A lot of glass lab equipment,
retorts,
and
all that
things
kind
like
of stuff.
that are made out of this
borosilicate glass.
This is an insert for a hot beverage drink glass, and this is a borosilicate.
Right.
Yeah. Now, the remaining types of glass, I'm just going to mention very briefly because they're not relevant to the conversation.
You have to go real brief.
Yes. Aluminosilicate and 96% silica glass and fused silica glass. That sort of stuff is really more like stuff that you would be concerned with if you worked for NASA. And it involves much different processes that are at much higher temperatures. And we're not going to touch that right now because it's not relevant to glassware. But just so you know that there are other types of glass that are produced that are much more expensive than the types that are used to put drinks in. Now, going on to anatomy of glass. We're not going to talk too much about this, only because we don't have all the time in the world. But generally speaking, the way that you would make a glass, traditionally with the traditional tools, you would take something called a mandrel, which is kind of like a rod, and you would plunk you would splotch some hot glass onto the end of it, and then you would use that to stick it onto another piece of glass that you'd be working with. The glass that you'd been working with would have been blown through a tube. You would have stuck it into the furnace or kiln and gotten it really hot, and then use your own breath to blow it into a shape, and then you use tools to form it. Now, there are all sorts of different shears and things that are used to manipulate the glass while it's hot. There are also tools that are used to form it and lend shapes to it. And then you would take the mandrel and stick it on the end. And that would be the way that you would sort of hold on to it and manipulate it. There are other ways to hold on to glasses while in process, but I'm not going to go into that right now, because what's interesting about the mandrel is that you end up with a little, like if you use a mandrel to manipulate it, you end up with a little kind of scar on the bottom of the foot of the glass, and that's called a pontil mark, because the little lump of glass that you use to stick the glass to the mandrel is called a pontil. So if you see a pontil mark, which is just sort of like a semicircular or round scar on the bottom of your rim,
Here's a pontil.
You know that you're dealing with something that was free blown.
Okay, this is not a glass, obviously. It's a blown bottle, but you can see, well, there it is. The pontil.
I've always wondered how that occurred. I always thought, is it a flaw of some sort? But
Well,
it's on.
It is, in a sense. It is a,
Right.
it's a production
It's
flaw.
a mark of the maker. It's the hand of the maker. It's
Gotcha.
you seeing the hand of the maker
Yeah.
in the work.
It's a production flaw that allows you to know that it was produced in a handmade fashion.
And a lot of in art glass and in art glass, so like decorative glassware, you frequently see a polished pontil. So they'll take that little nubbin that's right there, and they'll polish it off so that it's just so that it looks ground down almost.
I'm someone that in a cocktail, I always look towards the bottom of the glass, and at the end of the drink, I look up at that mark in the bottom, because it always fascinated me. We do have one question, guys, and I just want to make sure we address it. So, Seth, thank you for joining us. Thanks for the question. So one of the questions is, are there any legal federal regulations against using vintage lead glassware commercially? And if not, are there still companies producing this style of glassware today for commercial use?
Yes, there are. There are no laws about its use. The interesting thing about it is that there are various opinions about the safety of lead glass. A lot of people look at it from the perspective that no amount of lead is safe, which is true in the sense that you don't want to expose yourself to lead if you don't have to. So the simplest and most the best risk management statement that you can give from a medical perspective is just don't use it. However, scientifically speaking, the amount of lead that comes out of that can potentially leach out of lead glass depends on a couple of factors. First of all, the percentage of lead that's used in the process. So just like we said earlier, there's, you could get 20 or maybe 24% lead in the batch. That's kind of normal. There are other producers that go up as high as 30 or more %, and you can usually tell those pieces by their sheer weight. Okay, so the higher percentage lead glass is very heavy for its size. So that's one of the dead giveaways for that. You maybe want to avoid using that high amount of lead, because you're just, kind of asking for trouble at that point, because by the sheer weight of it. It's like, wow, this must have a lot of lead content, and the content does influence how much can leach out. Another thing that influences how much can leach out is what you're putting in it and for how long. So using a lead decanter or sipping a glass of red wine out of a crystal glass doesn't really expose you to very much lead at all. In fact, it has been demonstrated that the trace amounts of lead that are in our diets already, naturally, that we can't really avoid.
I've heard that as well. The one concern I have is that the reason why we would suggest hand washing these type of glassware that's lead-based?
That's a really good question. Now, the fact is that lead glass, the more often it's washed, actually, the less lead there is on the surface to leach into whatever you're putting into it. So frequent washing is actually a good thing from the perspective of wanting to minimize the amount of lead that's going to leach out of your glass. But the amount that you wash it and the nature of how you wash it in terms of the heat, this, like if you're using a dishwasher, the drying cycle, which exposes it to very hot air, those are the things that actually potentially weaken or damage the glass. Also, the fact that it's being put upside down, like we mentioned earlier, and exposing the fine, if it has a really fine rim, like for a wine glass, you're going to be exposing that to damage, chipping, or breakage. So that's why you hand wash. I just wanted to mention before we go forward, though, that it is basically, there's no direct scientific evidence that normal use of a lead glass would pose a health risk. But here's things that we know pose a health risk when it comes to lead glass. Storing stuff in it for an extended period of time, such as if you were to put a fine rum or whiskey into a lead decanter and then set it into your shelf, like onto your shelf or in your cabinet, that's a big no-no. Because if the next time, if it's a couple of months until you reach for that decanter of port, for example, you could be ingesting very significant amounts of lead and poisoning yourself very quickly with something that you leave in it for a while. And also, it depends what you're putting in it, like how chemically active is it? Are we talking about wine? Are we talking about something that has like a high acidity? Are we talking about something that has a high proof? Those are all things that are going to leach the lead out more effectively and become more dangerous for you. But in the course of a typical use of a glass, if you just pour something into it, drink it out of it, and then wash it and put it away, then that generally doesn't seem to pose that much of a risk in terms of what we know at this time.
I just want to chime in on a practical application of using lead glass in service in a bar. Things to consider include the fact that you shouldn't put it upside down to wash it. If you're not using a 3-sink, then you're going to put it in a industrial dishwasher. You're likely to damage it, and then you won't be able to use it. If you got chips on your rim, you can't serve that to someone. If it's heavier than regular glass, which means that that should be a consideration when you're serving beverages and someone's carrying a tray full of glasses. I mean, like, I know this might sound very simple, but on the other hand, like, every consideration that we can give to the people working with us, in addition to the people that we're serving, is important. And also, and it costs more. It costs a lot more. So think about a bad night in a bar. I mean, like, I've worked a night where like someone working with me broke 10 glasses. It's happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes trays get dropped or racks get dropped, and then you lose all of that. And that goes into your cost of goods.
Yeah. So your price point for lead glass is significant. It's a big jump. So we don't necessarily specifically recommend specializing in or using a lot of lead glass. It's not necessarily a bad idea, but it's the sort of thing that, mistakes can cost you, both in terms of price and if there's, some sort of oversight that potentially might put someone at risk. That's a consideration that you're going to want to maybe have like a HACCP plan for that. If you're,
so also to stay away from the well rinser.
Say again?
The well rinser?
Oh, no,
you mean the glass rinser?
No, you can use it carefully.
Yeah, you just don't want to put a lot of English on it. You know, like,
Right.
You don't want to put it, because when it comes to washing, let's say a pint glass, you tend to put a lot of like lateral pressure on it to kind of like really twist it up and down in order to get it clean. And with something like that, you have to be very delicate with it. And hand washing in general or with a sponge is actually probably good. The other reason you wouldn't necessarily want to put lead glass in one of those 3 sink baths is unless you're one of those people, and if you are, you know who you are, who tends to let your water get cool so that your hands aren't uncomfortable, then maybe you can wash the lead glass in there. But if you've got a 3 sink bath that's hot enough in its first stage that you really would like it to be, as hot as you'd like it to be for cleaning, the thermal shock of sticking it in there could potentially crack a very finely rimmed glass. So that would be another consideration. Really hot water, because the companies recommend that you wash crystal in warm water,
we got
not
20
hot water.
minutes.
Okay.
Wait, we should probably move on to glass groups and stuff.
Yes.
Like that.
Okay. So let's talk about the anatomy real quick. So we were talking about ponto marks. That was one thing. Another thing, while we're at the foot, let's talk about the kick. The kick is that thing in the bottom of your champagne glass or your wine bottle. I mean, your champagne bottle or your wine bottle. It's basically a void that's created using a tool in order to push a portion of the base up into the body or other cavity. So it creates an air cavity in the bottom that if it's in the bottom of a glass, and it actually sometimes it'll actually protrude into the body of the glass, thereby, for example, in shot glasses, where there's a section that sticks up in the middle, kind of like a little hill, that is causing the interior volume to be diminished. So that can sometimes be useful for decorative purposes. Also, in the case of a bottle, of course, you can hold it by the kick. Moving up, this whole general area being called the foot, referred to as the foot of the glass. Opposite to the foot, you have the rim. In older glasses, and when I say older, I mean several hundred years older, one of the things that you'll notice is that the foot is significantly wider than the rim, and that's something that was used for stability. That can be the case or not the case these days, but it's much more common in more modern glasses to see a foot that's a smaller diameter than the rim. That's more modern than old, and if you see a big foot. Anyway, then you've got the stem, which is attached to the foot while they're both hot, so that they stick to one another. The stem can sometimes have fun stuff inside it, sometimes called like an air trap, which is basically a void that's created by deliberately causing an air bubble to form inside there. Then you can get crazy and like twist those air bubbles, and that's called an air twist, and you get this crazy decorative design inside the stem. You can use like colored glass or opaque glass and twist that, and there's all these crazy things that you can do for decoration inside the stem. In various points of the stem, you might see something that's kind of round or rectangular, and that's referred to as a knop. K-N-O-P, a knop. Would you ever wonder what the name for that was? That's the name. The top knop, you might say, which is usually flattened and is oftentimes just beneath the bowl, is referred to as a marise. And then up on the bowl here, well, that's kind of self-explanatory. Then you have, what are these little things sticking out? Those are called prunts. And a prunt is basically any kind of lump of hot glass that gets shoved and applied onto the side of a glass. Sometimes it gets sort of dragged out so that you form a teardrop shape or whatever, different kinds of prunts out there, but they're essentially there both for decoration and sometimes for purchase. So if you don't have a handle on a glass or a vessel, then sometimes there might be some prunts there to help you hold on to it. Let's talk quickly about decoration.
Yeah.
What?
14 minutes. We need to talk about that.
Okay. Well, let's skip decoration then. So I have to mention one thing though. There are different, okay, let's just very fast. Etching, blasting, engraving, cutting, twisting, okay, printing, gilding, enamel, and then, so these are all the different ways that you can decorate glass. For example, there is, you've got an example of screen printing right here. This is an acid etched surface here. This is actually a couple of different methods.
Hold it up to the
So you've got an acid etch surface. That's going to have a smooth, like that's the sort of milky part of the glass there. What you've basically done is you've used a substance called a resist, which basically is a sacrificial or protective thing that you put on the glass, and then the section that's not covered by the resist gets exposed to the acid and gets eaten away and gets this sort of a hazy look to it. And then what they've done is they've removed the resist, and then they've gone in and gilded it. So you take like an adhesive and you paint the adhesive onto there, and then you use gold foil or silver foil or platinum foil, and you sort of like plenish it on to the adhesive, and that's how you do gilding. Then you've got, this is an enamel paint situation. So you've got glass that has you mix different oxides in there that give it different colors, and then it's very difficult to do enamel painting because you have to know exactly which colors you're using, because they don't look the color that they're going to be until you fire it in the kiln. So you refire it. But it's that one of the things about enamel is that it doesn't fade. So if you've got a color in enamel, it's never going to be faded by sunlight or anything else. It's just going to be the same color as when it was first done. Here you've got an example of needle etching. So this is the first etching that we're talking about. So you've taken a needle, a very fine needle, and you're doing etching work there, and that's why the line is so fine. Then you've got sometimes with some bolder and deeper lines and cuts here. This is what's you're using a copper wheel with like basically a like you're basically using an abrasive tool on a copper wheel to go ahead and kind of incise decorations into the glass. Copper wheel etching is very difficult to master, and in the cases of fields where you have significant amounts of this kind of frosted look, depending on what the frosted look looks like, you know how it was made. Here it's completely smooth. This is how you know it's an acid bath that's created this frosting. If you see a little bit of sort of stippling or graininess to it, then it's possible that it might have been sandblasted. And in the case of copper wheel etching, you can create the same effect, but it's going to have a grain. It's going to have a grain, just like you know, it's going to look more natural. You're going to see some see a grain to it from the repeated passes with the copper wheel.
Yeah, there's this guy.
There's an example of another example of a copper wheel etched
Cordial glass.
Yeah, I've got cordial glass, and it's got some I believe it has
thistles.
Some thistles on it. Yeah. So let's see, what else are we going to talk about? Gild, enamel, printing. Okay, so fluting is something that you can accomplish with tools. You know, sort of like in this case, this is a mold.
This is a molded flute.
So this is blown into a mold, and the decoration, the decorative shapes are included in the mold already. But if you are trying to, you can also manipulate the glass by hand with tools in order to create some of these fluting effects and so forth. This is also referred to as an optic glass, because I don't know if you can see, but if you slowly turn that, you can see that there are basically some very subtle flutings in the glass, and that's because of the quality of the glass that was used and the nature of the mold. And
I love an optic glass. I love it. Yeah,
they're pretty fun, aren't they? And that increases also the brilliancy of the glass in a physical process rather than a chemical process. Let's see. Do you want to sort of take point on this next section, or
where
well, you say you want to talk about specific types of glassware and all that.
So I want to. Well, I'm going to start by saying hello again. One of the reason that we're calling this class that vintage is the new green is because the production of glass uses a lot of fuel, uses a lot of sand, and all of those things are also used in lots of other production. But typically, I have found that these older glasses, these vintage glasses, have more visual interest and greater integrity than a lot of the glasses that I've purchased for bars.
Well,
within the price point that you can, like when you know you're going to be breaking glasses, you know what I mean? Like using vintage glassware, you can potentially have nicer glassware than you could afford if you were buying it new. and also sort of along the whole idea of, reuse. Anyone who's listened to me preach about eliminating waste in your beverage program through, utilizing kitchen waste or finding a way to utilize your own waste in the bar in terms of production, this is another way to do that. These are things that could go into a landfill. Some of them could be recycled maybe, but like the idea is that there's so much stuff that we have already produced in the world, right? Like we've made a lot of stuff already as a species, that it kind of behooves us to consider the utility of things that are already there. Maybe they don't all match, but you can always it's easy math to figure out what drink goes in what glass, in terms of ounceage and stuff like that. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about while Christian makes a cocktail. Christian's making a cocktail with Appleton.
An Appleton Estate signature blend cocktail there, Christian.
Appleton Estate signature blend right here. We've got it's one of the things I like about it is that although it is an 80 proof spirit, which is something, there's nothing wrong with that. But, when it comes to a hot drink, which is what we're making today, like a toddy style drink, oftentimes I tend to gravitate towards stuff that's higher proof because it tends to defend itself a little better from the dilution of the hot water, because you have to use a certain amount of dilution for the drink to be hot enough to appreciate. But I would say that for an 80 proof spirit, Appleton signature has a lot of body and flavor for its proof. And that allows you to use it for applications like this, where you might normally have to reach for a higher spirit than 80.
So Christian, you want
and also I'll add, Christian, as you can see, we've transitioned our packaging. That's and correct. We paid attention to our packaging in terms of the glassware as well. I would just want to quickly talk about that, because it was very important for us to not just look great on the back bar, but to have a look and feel that felt very premium and very heritage, very vintage. And so when you look at our glassware, even the embossing, we went from a cartouche to the 1749 on the glass itself, the shape of the bottle, and even underneath the bottle, as you were talking about with the glassware, was important. And I want to ask you, from the looks of the bottle of our bottle, what is there any utility in that for even a larger format of bottling?
Well, for one thing that I can tell you that I can respond to in terms of the bottle shape, for example, there are a couple of salient points that we can point out. One of them is the fact that it's got a nice firm base, okay, which is great for putting it down without fear. Another thing it has is a waist. As you'll notice, it's slightly pinched towards the center, which allows for ease of like a positive purchase on it when you're holding it.
It also looks like it's going to fit in the well.
That's what I was going to say. It's not too wide, so this can fit right into a speed rack, which is wonderful when you want to use when you have a spirit that is so friendly to cocktail production. It's great for the bottle to also be friendly to the environment in which a cocktail is produced and the spirits are stored. So I think that those are all good points. The actual it looks like you're using a composite cork here. So that's a very practical way of making sure that the spirit doesn't dissipate into the ether. So you're defending the spirit from the depredations of time.
Oh yeah, because we've already lost 6% angel share in our tropical aging process. So that bottling was very important to end that process of going from distillation to maturation into bottling. A very it's something that for us was a point of need when we looked at the new bottle. But I want to hear more, especially about now we've gone from this fantastic bottle to now the use. And for me, when especially rum cocktails, because they tend to be in other styles of cupware, tiki style cupware, when we want to definitely elevate the conversation of premium rum, And so maybe give us some examples as to how we can elevate the conversation around glassware and rum cocktail presentation.
Sure.
I mean, I have never felt that rum only belongs in a tiki cup. Like,
Right.
you know, like that's short-sighted if there's anyone who feels that way.
And not saying it's the only way we see rum cocktails, but I think what you're presenting today is blowing my mind. And when I think about where I want to take my brand to the next level, vintage glassware is definitely a focus.
Well, it's interesting too, because one of the things that you bring up is, you know, in terms of this composite cork, first of all, the fact that you've got a nice sturdy composite cork that's going to defend, it's not only going to defend the spirit from Angel's Angel's thievery, it's also going to preserve the more exotic esters, like so those volatile aromatic compounds that, you know, that if you leave basically just leave a spirit open to the elements, all that stuff is going to eventually dissipate. So you want to, you know, keep it as intact as possible in order to preserve the nose of your spirit and the flavors that are represented in it. Now, also, the fact is that it's not made from wooden cork, and you know, cork is one of those things that it's a renewable resource, but it doesn't renew itself very quickly. That's one of the things that actually reminds me of some aspects of what happens with glassware and the production of new glassware, because we were talking earlier about the aggregate that's used. So the silica that is used, the sand that is used for the production of glasses. It's not that glasses are making sand very scarce, but the concrete that is used by the construction industry worldwide is putting a very severe strain on the deposits that are exploitable. And so we're actually in a aggregate shortage right now. And the more desperate companies get to access aggregate, they start taking more and more risks in terms of environmental impact to ecological areas, you know, and basically you end up putting more pressure, survival pressure, on the species and the ecosystems that we're trying to support and promote the health of. So that means that every time you buy a new glass, if you could go about potentially satisfying that need with a vintage glass, then it's worth considering. Obviously, when it comes to bottling, that's not really a consideration, because you have to have certain, you know, process-oriented things that standardization is required. So you can't use vintage. But for cocktails, there's nothing really stopping you except your own personal taste, or you know, the aesthetic that you're trying to depict in relation to your particular brand. So on a bar level, you can have some variation that you can't have in an assembly line. So that's where the glassware comes in terms of vintage glassware, as a way of trying to promote the health of our ecosystems.
Also, the having a variety of glassware where you don't have to buy 4 dozen of everything that you want to use in your bar is, you know, it's really a luxury if you stop and think about it that way. And while, I mean, like, the service that we provide is like, we can send you the size glasses that you want in the shape that you want, right? Like, we'll do the searching for you. But if you don't want to do it through us, we're encouraging you to do it for yourself. If you have the time to go. And
thrift shops, different vintage shops. And I think it's a really cool idea to have cocktails in different presentations.
A little plea. I mean, I know that as the cocktail renaissance gained steam, this glass really lost face, right? Because everyone thinks about the 80s and all the all of the teeny menus that got made, and every teeny, you know, every cocktail was like a chocotini or an apple teeny or whatever the teenies are. This glass was designed for a martini, right? We call this a martini. We call this a mantini because it's got a little short, no stem, really, a stemless martini glass.
Well, it's a foot without a stem.
But sort of, I kind of want to make an argument for sort of using your imagination when you're thinking about how you're going to serve your beverages. And these kinds of glasses really like give you an opportunity. Like there are so many different kinds of Nick and Nora's in the world, and I love a Nick and Nora. It's one of my favorite glass shapes. I think that a martini, that a 50-50 in this glass, or a Dirty Gibson, just sit with me for a minute, like, or a Dirty Gibson, because I do like a Dirty Gibson, in this glass tastes better than it does in any other glass, and I don't know why. I think it's because the glass is so good.
I'm there with you, Phoebe. I'm there with you.
Another one to consider is, I mean, we talk about champagne saucers, you know, like people refer to it as a coupe or a champagne saucer.
Yeah.
There are ones, for example, that like Phoebe's holding.
This is a hollow stem.
Right.
The beverage goes all the way down into it. Now, one of the funny things about a hollow stem glass is that it sort of defeats the purpose of a stem glass, because a stem glass is supposed to keep your warm hands away from your cold drink.
Yeah.
But in the case of a stemless, I mean, of a hollow stem glass, it's really just, it's for novelty, you know, it's for fun. And so what's interesting is that if you use that sort of glass, you want to use for a drink that has a very pleasant, and especially pleasant color.
Yeah, like a fancy sour looks great in the glass.
Yeah,
you know,
like
or
for example,
even a fancy Manhattan.
Well, you know what would look great in that glass? I mean, this is a dated reference, but it's like an example of exactly the sort of color that we're talking about. A Cosmopolitan.
Yeah, Cosmo would look
or for example, or like a you know, like a Jack Rose.
Right.
You know, like like a rum sour with a little bit of if you were adding in a little bit of house grenadine or something like that was going to give it a little bit of a blush color. You're going to see that wonderful blush color, you know, being represented throughout the entire sort of body of the glass.
Do not ever put an egg drink in this glass. I'm just telling you, as a person who did it.
Yeah.
If you're using an egg white, do not ever put it in a hollow stem glass, because it is not necessarily the easiest thing to clean.
Can I say something too? I almost feel like, especially as we've gone through the different types of glasses, I almost feel like there's also an experience for the guest to kind of learn how to hold the glass properly. Because by force, you know, it kind of shows you like, hey, if you're holding this with the cup of your hand, this is going to make your drink get hotter quickly. Hold it by the stem. And it kind of forces their hand to do that.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that, because we can look at some of these sort of hybrid type shaped glasses. Like these are what you either call, depending on the size and the pitching of the angle, you would either call it a footed rocks glass or a Delmonico glass. So it's basically like a highball sized portion, like volume, but with a foot instead of, you know. So a footed rocks glass, it makes you think about, okay, well, why would you want one? Well, I mean, let's say you've got Raynaud's, syndrome, and like your hands get cold really easily. You're not necessarily going to want to hold on to a rocks glass full of ice, like with a cold beverage in there. The foot is going to be maybe useful for you. You know, so it's like depending on people's preferences. When it comes to like a Delmonico glass, you know, or like a footed sour, what's great about these is that depending on what drink you're serving, I'm thinking about, there are some kind of medium-sized, like not super tall, like coolers that are produced, say for example with Jamaica rums, that might lend themselves very nicely to, you know, be served in a sort of a hybrid glass style like this, because you're going to have the coldness buffered from the heat of your hand, but you're also going to still have that kind of sort of vertical cooler style presentation.
I'd also like to make a little, so this is a little shot glass. This guy's an old shot glass. It's got ounces. This is a medicine glass for, you know, taking your cough medicine. And I like every shot glasses. I'm from Philly. I've done lots of shots in my time. I've come to really appreciate cordial glasses for neat pours and shots also, because they're beautiful, and they hold about the same volume as this glass, as the shot glass, but they're more graceful. And if you do not want to take your whole shot as a shot, even if someone bought you a shot, you know what, you don't have to do it, and you can sip on this guy. It looks way cooler than sipping out of a shot glass.
And it's more pleasant because the rim is.
I'm telling you, it's an experience. The glassware should be seen as part of the experience, for sure.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that that you want to touch on is that, like, if you're going to buy a certain type of glass with a vintage glass in the same price point, you're more likely to be able to afford ornamentation. So, and what do we mean by ornamentation? In many cases, with the older glasses, we're talking about somebody using their hands and their eye to produce the stuff, and it's a form of, a high form of craft. And so it's adding value for your customer when they're able to enjoy such grace notes. Now, speaking of enjoying grace notes, we've just whipped a little bit up with the Appleton Reserve. So this is a
Appleton signature.
Yeah. So it's the Appleton signature in here. I use just slightly more than 2 ounces in there just to make sure that that there's enough cowbell. There's a bit of Phoebe's homemade falernum, so that's more of a falernum dram. There's a bit of maple syrup going on in here for your sweetener, and then you have a bit of just grated nutmeg on the top. So it's just a very simple way. But it doesn't smell simple because there's so much great flavor being developed from the dunder in the early part of the fermentation process. That really brings out a lot of those the racier side of those dried fruit notes and those spice notes that are developed by the wood. So it's boiling water really literally elevates those aromas more readily towards your nose. So you sort of come a little close, and you suddenly start smelling all of the the pleasant flavors that are associated with the autumn.
Oh yeah, and Signature Blend, has that orange peel top note that everyone knows Appleton Estate for, and especially our molasses base, it's a little bit more on the stronger side, and so you've got the orange peel top note, that apricot, that citrus note that will come through on that cocktail as well. I would love if we, had the cocktail recipe to kind of, if we can share it with the community, because I think a lot of people, when they taste Signature, they think the daiquiris, and they think along that line for the cocktail. But right there, what you were saying, Christian, in terms of the notes that's coming out, that's fantastic.
It's a very contemplative spirit. It has enough body and musculature to withstand more aggressive preparations, but there's something to be said for appreciating the aromas in a little bit of a cleaner way. And I will say,
I put the.
Oftentimes, when I would be making a hot drink like that, oftentimes I'd be squeezing a little bit of citrus peel on the top of the drink. With the Appleton, you don't really need it. The Signature has so much of that citrus that you're talking about that it's like those notes are really coming very, very forward and being kind of delivered to your nose by the steam. So.
Okay, great. It's going into the comments now, Monique.
Perfect. I mean, guys, I think you guys I know you guys have covered a lot, but is there anything specifically you want people to take away from this conversation outside of the fact of, it's important to look at your ecological footprint at the bar in all aspects? This is a great way to lower it just from a point of view of the glassware. But is there anything else that you want our bar community to take away from this conversation when they're looking at vintage?
Thanks for asking. One of the things that we want to get people thinking about is how does what you buy get to you? Now, the funny thing is, why am I bringing this up? We would, if you were to buy stuff from us, we would be shipping it to you, which is what generally happens with stuff, is that it gets shipped around, is because we're not the only, like, what we're trying to do is not the only way to skin the cat. So for example, if you've got like a higher budget that you're working with for your project, you should really consider supporting local glassmakers, because there's going to be, it's only going to be last mile in terms of petrochemical usage for transportation, and all that stuff is good. Like that is the money that you spend with them is going to allow them to continue to exist and offer that option. And that is what is eventually, like having that option still around and having people be able to choose it is going to make a big impact. When it comes to not like just in general, trying to figure out ways to avoid buying something that was made yesterday, so to speak, is a way to just generally approach the problem of what we use in a way that may, in time, contribute to a shrinking of production. Because, like, you know, like production is supposed to always get bigger. You're supposed to hockey stick in terms of your profits. You're supposed to make more and more, increase the scale. And that's all well and good when it comes to making money. But when it comes to making money in a way that's sustainable and that allows us all to, you know, enjoy the free fruits of this world for as long as possible and actually have a future as a species, then we have to, you know, balance out those considerations with sustainability and purchasing something that's already been made. Basically, the carbon footprint of that thing is already fixed in its minimum, but you haven't necessarily exploited its maximum. So if you increase the longevity and the useful lifespan of things that are created for use, to be useful and to be beautiful, instead of buying something new.
David, can we go to camera 2 quick, just in terms of, okay.
In terms of, you know, buying something that already exists, then its environmental costs are already fixed. And if you increase its lifespan, you are increasing the utility that is gotten out of those precious resources. So that's one thing to consider. This
is a sample. I just set up a little sample table setting so that you could kind of see, like, these are all mismatched dinnerware, silverware service from the 50s and 30s through the 50s, a punch bowl, Danish modern butter pat.
So this is a Dorothy Thorpe.
A Dorothy Thorpe punch bowl.
So it's from her line called Silver Band.
And look how beautiful that looks.
It is, isn't it? And I really love this set of the plates, these plates together with that bowl. So that's a Fiesta plate with a Johnson Brother, Taylor Smith Taylor luncheon plate and a Fire King bowl.
Those are gorgeous.
And these are all things that, like, I picked up because I liked them by themselves. And these actually live in our kitchen cabinets. But, like, we're also accumulating, like, mismatched dinnerware in hopes that people will sort of, like, adopt to this kind of aesthetic in their if you're going to use mismatched glasses. I love the way mismatched dinnerware looks. Anyone who's come to dinner at my house knows that not everyone gets the same plate, you know, like back when we had dinner parties.
And then when it comes to luncheon parties and things, when we're entertaining again, there's some really fun stuff that
bring it lower, forgotten. Christian, lower.
There's really fun stuff that's been forgotten over time. For example, the idea of the luncheon plate. You've got this, basically it's like a punch cup, as you would see in most punch sets. But in this case, they've extended the punch cup.
It comes with a snack plate, which you could also use, and that's actually borosilicate glass, and you could actually use those in service for, you know, like cocktail pairings.
Yeah. So that's a really great option if you're doing a party where there's a buffet.
It's not in the picture, Christian. Lower it.
And then you've got this little handle here. Notice these little crunks. Okay, so the decoration is also functional because it allows you to get a positive purchase on it, so that you don't have, so you can keep a hand free for shaking hands and greeting people and taking business cards. And then you just take a little sip from your drink, and you've got your plate all set up. And so it's a way of, you know.
Again, the idea is, like, if you don't want to go through a service like ours, if you take a little time on your day off or whatever, perhaps you can find what you need in your own town, thusly minimizing the amount of mileage that your stuff's traveling as well.
Or alternatively, if you want us to take the hard work out, then we can talk about what you need and put together a profile and shop for you.
Yeah.
One of the cool things that you can do is that when you have a lot of different glassware and china to choose from, you can basically, measure what's going on there, and you can impose a certain amount of functional uniformity on
in terms of plating,
a set, so that your plating can still look consistent in terms of the surface area that it takes up on the plate, so that your wash lines on your glass will come to roughly the same point on the glass, and still have the visual mismatch without all of the inconvenience of not knowing whether whether your drink is or your dish are going to look right.
Right, and we're way over time, so
okay.
I'm sorry we went so long, guys.
No, it's okay. And everyone in the comments are just loving this. I wish we could go for more than this time. I'm pretty sure everyone would love that. You all have touched not just on a way where we can change our footprint, but also how we can create this unique experience for our guests. And I think that's something that is very inspirational, because now I'm going to take a deeper look at that lane in the thrift shops that have these cool glasses. And I'm going to go and look for these. And the next time I make an Appleton cocktail, I'm going to have it in some vintage glassware.
Awesome.
That sounds
That's great.
Yeah. But I want to thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Christian, for this wealth of knowledge. I'm going to do some education behind me now at the bar that I'm at, and I'm going to tell these guys, let's go look for vintage glassware for our next Appleton cocktail menu.
Awesome.
It was our pleasure, and it was wonderful spending some time with you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for paying attention and hanging in.
Yeah, it's been really great. For people that joined us today, and these videos that Portland Cocktail Week creates, this platform is really important. For you all who have enjoyed this class, please make sure to hit the like or the love button and show some love in the comments if you happen to view it on your own time. If you want to see more Portland Cocktail Week classes like this one, please follow Portland Cocktail Week on Facebook. That's what you see popping up here, PDXCW Facebook page. And join them on the YouTube as well, because there's lots of videos there to go back to. I'm going to go back and rewatch this one. And of course on Instagram. Feel free to follow us on Instagram too. I'm Monique Brackett, again, the Jamaican Rum Portfolio Ambassador for Appleton Estate. But I would be nothing without the knowledge of you guys. So I thank you, Phoebe. I thank you, Christian, for joining today. I wanted to be part of this conversation. I really felt like rum was the one to do this. So thank you for proving that right.
Oh, no, we're very glad. We've had a great time.
So on behalf of Campari Community, Campari Academy USA, Appleton Estate, Portland Cocktail Week, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for the great conversations. And we'll see you again on the next session.
Yeah, take care.